All right, we'll move through lab 25, the digestive system. And we see the list starting here, and we'll just work our way through. So let's go ahead and start with the models. And we're going to start with textbook figures first, and then see the details on the actual models. So to start out, we're looking at the space of the oral cavity. That's this figure here. So truly just the mouth, the internal space is the oral cavity. And the superior bony roof, that's the term, the hard palate, referencing the bones. Whereas the soft fleshy tissue posterior is a soft palate. And that ends all the way at the tip of the soft palate, known as the uvula. Truly that tip of the soft palate. We can see in this area of the throat, this is truly a lymphatic organ, not necessarily a digestive organ, but we're in the vicinity there. So a palatine tonsil, and of course the entire organ here, the tongue. It would be on the inferior base of the tongue, so not a good labeling, but what we have to work with here, the lingual frenulum, just that next term going down the order. And we see at the base, at the posterior part of the tongue, another lymphatic organ, a lingual tonsil. As far as the next couple of terms, the papillae, these are on the surface of the tongue. And for these, we're going to have to go to a textbook figure. Don't have the model for that. So you can see on the tongue here, the types and locations of papillae. So it's towards the tip of the tongue is where we see the first type here. So the tip and the medial part of the tongue, the filiform papillae. And it's to the posterior arch right here in the back. So the circumvallate papillae. And it's really to the medial side, or I should say lateral side, towards the lateral side. The fungiform papillae. So we have those labeled there. Yeah, definitely the lateral side of the tongue. Fungiform. So then moving on to the section for the teeth, we have the view here. And the names are the same for the mandible or the maxilla. And so we could kind of just split it right down the middle because the names are the same for right and left sides. So we can start with a central incisor, and then the next tooth over, a lateral incisor. The next tooth after that, a cuspid. And now the next two, you notice the distinction, first premolar, second premolar. And then the remaining teeth are all molars, and it's just first molar, second molar, third molar, just like so. So now moving down the throat to the area of the pharynx. You notice here, this is a picture from the respiratory system, better view for it. So we'll go in the anatomical order. The superior part of the pharynx, and this is actually not included in the digestive system. We're in the vicinity. This is the nasopharynx. And now inferior to that, the next section, we're now getting to true digestive structures. There's an oropharynx, and then inferior to that, a laryngopharynx. So those three segments of the pharynx. And we're going to continue, of course, down to the esophagus, continuing with the digestive tract. And the esophagus itself is going to lead right into the stomach. So now we have this view of the stomach, and where the esophagus connects to the stomach, we're just tracing around the ring of the cardia. The midsection of the stomach is known as body, and it will be better highlighted when we show the two sides. So the distal end of the stomach, this area known as the pylorus, and that ends with the thickening of the muscle there, is the pyloric sphincter. So closing off the distal end of the stomach. And the opposite side of the stomach, we have the superior bulge, is the fundus. So to go back to the term, the body is all this area between the fundus and the pylorus. So really the majority of the stomach, that midsection's the body. And then continuing to move on, we have the different sides of the stomach. So this shorter medial side is known as a lesser curvature. And the opposite, the longer lateral side, is the greater curvature of the stomach. We see the folds, the ridges inside, known as the rugae of the stomach. And it's now beyond the pylorus. That'll lead us to the small intestines. And this first segment of the small intestines known as the duodenum. So let's switch over now to a view here. Just distal to the stomach, the order is first the duodenum, and then the jejunum, and that's seen here. We'll highlight this area of jejunum. And now the rest of the small intestines, the longer section, known as the ileum. So we have those areas there. And just in the order, I just always remember it's D, J, and then the third part is ileum. So DJ, ileum, the order for the small intestines, proximal to distal. And then we have the term, the plica secularis. So the plica are these large folds inside of the small intestines. So we see a ridge like so, and then of course the villi come off of that. And the final term for the small intestines, again, ileum, and we can see where it leads into the large intestines, and that junction point, this is what's known as the ileocecal valve. And this leads us now into the large intestines. So that initial portion of the large intestines is known as the cecum. So you can see where that name, the ileum and the cecum, come together, and the valve at that location, ileocecal valve. And hanging off from the cecum is the appendix. So this small portion here. So now traveling up the right side of our abdomen, this whole section of tubing known as ascending colon, and then we get to the right colic flexure, so where it curves, the point where it curves here, and then coming across is a transverse colon, and then there's now another curve, so the left colic flexure, and now descending down, the descending colon dropping down the left side, and then ultimately we have this kind of S-curved region known as sigmoid colon. So all of these different sections here. And now going back to some of the details for the colon, there's the term, the tinea coli, and we see the labeling here, but keep in mind it's this muscle running truly the length of the colon across here, is that tinea coli. The term haustra is referring to the bulging segmented appearance of the large intestines. So we see all of these bulges here. It's a haustra. The term omental appendices, or here the textbook labels it fatty appendices, just another term for the same thing. So just little clusters of fat. They're really kind of hanging off of the colon itself. And then, of course, the final section of large intestines is the rectum. And the canal at the end of the pathway is the anus. And moving on to the accessory organs now, we have the diaphragm that we've now already seen. Just inferior to the diaphragm, we see the liver. And inferior to that, the gallbladder. And we'll get a closer look, of course. So with the gallbladder, the connected duct structure, specifically leading right to the gallbladder, is a cystic duct. And then merging with the duct structures of the liver, the cystic duct merges on, and this forms the area of the common bile duct. And we could follow that common bile duct all the way to the duodenum. We also see in this vicinity the pancreas. So a view of the pancreas, and then running through the midline of the pancreas, there's a pancreatic duct. So that canal running through the pancreas. Moving on to the salivary glands. So we can see right along the lateral side of the jaw, right, superficial to that posterior edge of the masseter muscle. There's the parotid salivary gland with its parotid duct. There's a submandibular salivary gland. And you can see inferior to the tongue, a view of that sublingual gland. And since we're here, again, inferior to the tongue, here we have a labeling for that term, lingual frenulum. So that was seen earlier on the list. And lastly, at the end of the lab, there's a spleen. Again, the spleen truly is a lymphatic organ, but we're just in the vicinity of the abdominal cavity. So you notice to the left side, the location of the spleen. So now we'll move into seeing these same organs just on the models. So we'll go through the list again. So starting again, the space of our mouth, the oral cavity, and the bony roof, hard palate, soft palate, and the tip of that being the uvula. We can see this area here, the labeling for that palatine tonsil. Palatine tonsil, the tongue itself. And again, we just pointed out inferior to the tongue, that location of the lingual frenulum, as well as posterior to the tongue, that area of the lingual tonsil. So these two areas here are tonsils. The filiform, fungiform, circumvallate papillae. Again, we just have a textbook figure we would use for these. And then moving on to the teeth. So we could just count here, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because the other half is just duplicated. So we'll have a central incisor, the lateral incisor, the cuspid, and now there's a first premolar, a second premolar, and then we have first molar, second molar, and then of course here, third molar. So we can see all of those teeth labeled. We'll go back to this model for the pharynx, and we'll do it in order of anatomical structures. So there's a nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. Naso, oro, and laryngopharynx from superior to inferior. So now moving down from the area of the pharynx, we have the esophagus. And then we can see the esophagus leading down to the stomach. And we'll just get a closer look at the stomach there. So we have the area of the cardia. We have the fundus portion. The midsection is body. And the distal end, the pylorus. We have the different sides of the stomach. So of course there's the lesser curvature and the greater curvature. And we can see the folds, the bulges, arrugae inside. And at the distal end of the pylorus, we see that pyloric sphincter. So all of those sections there on the stomach. So now we can see the stomach leading into the small intestines. And this first section here, of course, being the duodenum. And you notice the cutaway window inside, the ridges inside of the small intestines. That's a view of the plica circularis within. And then spanning from the duodenum, moving on to first the more superior portion of the jejunum and the inferior portion of the ileum. And just a little better view of that. So you can see the curved shape of the duodenum. We have that more superior section for the jejunum and the more inferior section of the ileum. And from here, we can see how it leads right into this ileocecal valve, right at this point here. And within the large intestines, the area of the cecum, the appendix seen here hanging down from that point, and the ascending colon, the right colic flexure, the transverse colon, the left colic flexure, descending colon, a sigmoid colon here at the end, and then we'll skip over to another figure. So starting here at this sigmoid colon, and then concluding here at the rectum with the anus at the end. Again, the bulging segments are the haustra, and it appears as this white line. This is all the area of the tinea coli. So highlight it here across the large intestines. And this model does not have any appearance of the fatty appendices, the omental appendices, just not shown. And then moving on to the accessory structures. So the diaphragm, of course, we've seen with the muscle structure. Diaphragm separates thoracic cavity from abdominal pelvic cavity. The liver, we'll go back to a view here. Just putting the liver back on this model. And the gallbladder. To get the better detail now, we want to switch back to this model here. So we have the gallbladder with its connected cystic duct. And we can see when it merges with the other duct over here, we're not learning the name of. Now here in green and down here as well. That's that all area of the common bile duct. So our cystic duct. And then down here in green as well, we can see the common bile duct. We have the area of the pancreas and the canal running through it, pancreatic duct. We'll switch over to a model for the jaw. We have a parotid salivary gland with the attached parotid duct. And we have a view here of the submandibular salivary gland. So the submandibular salivary gland. And again, we don't have a good view for sublingual salivary gland. And again, we've already seen the spleen. So seen to the left side of the abdominal cavity. And that'll wrap things up here for the model list for the organs.